We are 3 lockouts deep into the final phase of Classic Anniversary, and there have been some pretty amazing and remarkable stories in the Classic community since the launch of Naxx. In this video, I want to highlight updated statistics on Naxx clears 3 weeks in, show that Alliance guilds are leaps and bounds better and stronger than Horde guilds, or maybe they just have it easier, and share about an Alliance guild that has accomplished something that has never been done before in Naxx, including on era servers. First off, let's visit these general statistics. These numbers were pulled on Monday afternoon, so this does not include progression from the evening of the last day of the third reset, but it should be pretty representative. We've seen a strong spike in overall Naxx clears since week 1. Looking at the totality of raid logs across the US and the EU, the majority of the player base has still not cleared Naxxramas, but 34% of the raiding Naxxramas population has cleared. So just over a third has quote-unquote beaten the game. Now, I don't think this is particularly shocking. Naxx is a really punishing raid, and small mistakes can easily lead to a loss of world buffs, which, at this point in the game, is extremely difficult to clear without world buffs. Sure, you have the Frontiers of the world who cleared Naxx without buffs on hardcore. Kudos to those guys, by the way, that's a huge accomplishment. But your average guild, mine included, likely needs to rebuff before Saffron in order to get the clear in, which will often require a second raid day, which many guilds just don't have the luxury to field players for. But what is shocking is the most common point of progression for guilds is a full 15 out of 15 clear. If you were to combine maybe the progression points of the final 3 encounters being somewhere on 4 Horse, Saf, or KT still working through prog, most skills would fall into this combined category of progression of being on either one of those 3 bosses. But for singular points of progression, a full clear is most common. I think if you were to look at the majority of guilds that are less than 5 bosses in at this point, my guess is that many of these guilds have stopped running. Now, there are bound to be exceptions, but this would be my guess. In our guild, we've cleared the raid all 3 lockouts, but each one thus far, we have needed a cleanup raid for Saffron and KT. We've really felt not having the extra health from DMT in particular. But if you were to dig a bit deeper and look more at the breakdown of both region and faction, there's a really interesting picture behind the broader numbers. First off, I want to look at the regions. The EU region looks much stronger than the US. Out of 494 guilds or scheduled Naxx groups, whatever is being tracked on Warcraft logs here, 199 of the EU groups have cleared Naxx, which is about 40% of the EU raiding Naxx population. When you look at the United States, about 26% of the guilds have cleared. This is a pretty big difference, but it gets even more interesting. If you break down both Alliance and Horde for each region, you will see 2 things. One is that Alliance in vanilla is generally stronger than Horde, and this is for both the EU and the US. In the EU, about 47% of Alliance groups have cleared Naxx, and in the US, 29% of Alliance guilds have cleared. This means if you're a European Alliance player, basically half of your raiding population has beaten the game, which is a different story than in the United States, where less than a third has cleared. Looking at Horde, in the EU, 32% of Horde groups have cleared, which is almost the same as the US Alliance. But most shockingly is that only 22% of US Horde guilds have cleared the raid. Comparing EU Alliance at 47% clear and US Horde at 22% is wild. One has cleared at better than double the rate of the other. You would think that they're playing 2 different games. If you are a guild on US Horde and you have not cleared, you are with the overwhelming majority that has not cleared in the United States Horde. And as a US Horde player at Anniversary, I think I have grounds to say this, but we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel here. It's always been a generally understood notion that Naxx is harder on Horde, but this is shown to definitely be the case in Anniversary. European guilds on the whole seem to be way better at clearing than US-based guilds. And Alliance guilds, when looking at the numbers just generally, have it easier to clear with paladins instead of shamans. Or it's maybe that Horde guilds are just not as strong. It's probably a bit of both if I had to guess. Okay, that was probably too much of looking at numbers. Now I'd like to highlight something that has been done in Naxx and Anniversary that we have never seen before. Frontier's no world buff Naxx clear was very impressive. Yes, flasks of Distilled Wisdom were used like candy in the run, but even with all the flasks, I don't think I would be as smart or prepared enough as a player to pull something like that off. Hats off to their group. But what in particular has caught my eye has been the All Dwarf guild Ironforged on US-Nightslayer. If you're unfamiliar with this group of dwarf chads, let me provide some modest background. They are a group that only permits dwarves in their raids and guild, which means they only use paladins and priests for healing, warriors, rogues, and hunters for tanking and DPS. Absolutely no druids, warlocks, or mages. In the second lockout of Phase 6, they defeated Kel'Thuzad. Now, at first you may think, cool, good for them of leaning into a role-playing environment and getting the job done. But I think it's important to call out just how impressive this is. For melee DPSers, there's no Curse of Wreck or Fairy Fire. They have no magic damaging abilities other than maybe a priest going shadow, but they have no decurse. In the Noth the Plaguebringer encounter, he puts out a curse, and if it isn't decursed, then the whole raid takes damage and it leads to a raid wipe. The GM of Ironforged, Frugo, shared with me over Discord that there was another guild in 2019 Classic called Dwarven Overlords, another all-dwarf guild. They had completed all the content up to Phase 6, but couldn't get past Noth. Ever since this dwarf guild was stopped in Naxx, a small community of dwarves have been theory crafting of how they could get past bosses in Naxx that require decurses. Well, this raid group, without decursers, figured out how to beat this boss. And no, restorative potions was not the answer. Did you know that if you are far off in Narnia during the Noth encounter, somewhere super far away from Noth, while the curse expires, the curse doesn't do damage to people in the raid? Yeah, I had no idea either. This game has been out for 20 years, and I had no clue. But these savvy dwarves figured it out. When the curse went out, they would run as far as they could from Noth. When the curse expired, then they would make the trek all the way back across the room, back into the fight. They had a paladin tank Noth in case the main tank got the curse, so he could just bubble it off. And apparently they figured out that you can also line of sight the curse when it initially goes out. Who knew? But what was most impressive was Saffron. A handful of their core players, like 5 to 8 of them, tested out some tech on how they could approach Saf's Drain Life mechanic. Their pallies could bubble off the Drain Life curse, great, but how would they go about living through all the other players getting Drain Life? Well, do you remember Lady Vashj pre-nerf progression back in TBC Classic? One of the best and most widely accepted tech was for the third phase of Lady Vashj, where players would drop engineering mines and thornling seeds from Dire Maul on the outer ring of her platform. The tech was that spore bats in Phase 3 could target the thornling seeds in the mines as quote-unquote players for their poison, which then left a puddle on the ground and did massive damage to players in them. But if these items were dropped outside the main area of the room, then the poison would be out of the way, not harming players who were DPSing Vashj in the middle of the platform. This same tech was basically applied for the Drain Life mechanic on Saf. The dwarves would use all sorts of summoned pets and thornling seeds at the right time prior to a curse going out to give more targetable players for the curse to go onto. Additionally, they found out that mechanical pets in particular could be targeted for Drain Life, but they take no damage from the dot nor heal Saffron because they're immune to the shadow damage. Let's take a look at the logs of their Saffron kill here. Look at all of these pets that were used for the kill. It's insane. They had 97 friendly pets during the Saffron encounter that were summoned. This is a combination of target dummies, thornling seeds, mechanical yetis, hunter pets, Barav peasants, compact harvest reapers, explosive sheeps, tracking hounds, and love fools. Yeah, they saved up love fools from February just for this moment, not being sure if they would actually work on Saffron, but because they had been theory crafting for, and I kid you not, years on how they could get past the Frostworm. These guys went all out, and as a GM of Ironforged alluded to, they realistically only had one shot at killing Saffron because of all the pets and consumes they farmed. Prior to their Saf kill, they had 11 consecutive attempts on Saffron. These were dry attempts to make sure that everyone knew the mechanics, and when it was their turn to drop or activate one of their pets. This group killed Kel'Thuzad in the second lockout of Naxx, and their goal of getting an all-dwarf Naxx clear was achieved. Frugo shared that they plan on running in TBC with non-dwarves this time around, but once a phase, we'll blow the horn to summon an all-dwarf raid, looking to take down the current content. This type of guild and this type of story is why I have such fondness for Classic WoW. This is a solved game, and people love to hate on how easy it is now. But even in its solved nature, players self-impose limitations, which create new metas and achievements that simply were not thought possible. Hardcore vanilla WoW is awesome, and Frontier's accomplishment of a no world buff Naxx is great. But something like an All Dwarf guild clearing Naxxramas, needing to use 97 pets on Saffron, it just brings a smile to my face. I hope you're enjoying Phase 6, and if you haven't cleared the raid yet, you are not alone, but do know that an All Dwarf guild has cleared it. But some food for thought. About 2/3 of the player base is somewhere between working on 4 horsemen and having full cleared. If your guild is getting closer to seeing 4 horsemen in the next few weeks, keep up the grind and the good work. But if you're feeling far off from this point and you're really wanting to complete the raid, maybe that's a personal goal of yours, well, maybe just think on that for a bit. Enjoy Phase 6, and hopefully the developers will communicate a more specific timeline for TBC pre-patch soon enough. Thanks.